Hello, dear friends. This week I'm talking about Parshat Ekev. And I want to talk about the interrelationship between the Parshiot of Vayetchanan and Ekev, especially since in Vayetchanan we had the first paragraph of the Shema in chapter 6 of Devarim. And as this week's Parsha, in Ekev, we have the second chapter of the Shema in chapter 11 of Devarim, Vayayim Shamoah. Now, the first question we can ask is, why do we take these two chapters and bring them together in the Shema and recite them together in the morning, in the evening? Well, for one, even though the command actually is only in the first one, where it says, to say these things in the morning and the evening. But if you compare the two paragraphs, the second one being longer than the first, you'll notice that there are striking similarities between them. Both of them talking about loving God with all your heart and all your soul. Even though the first one talks about also with all your might. Both of them talk about the mitzvah of the tefillin, which the only other place it's mentioned is in the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus. There it's also mentioned twice. And it's mentioned in these two paragraphs. Also the mezuzah is mentioned both in Shema and Vayayim Shamoah, both in chapter 6 and both in chapter 11 in these paragraphs. So there is an interesting connection between the two paragraphs. Next thing I'd like to point out is that in last week's Parsha, we had the Decalogue. Moses was reiterating the Decalogue, and as I mentioned last time, for the new generation, because only few had actually stood at Sinai 40 years previously. Of course, there were a number of people who had been there and heard it. I don't know exactly the numbers, but there are many who were born since that time, who are a new generation, who did not stand at Sinai. So he has to reiterate this for them. I remember at Sinai, there were two statements that were given directly from God. Anochi v'lo I am the Lord your God, and you shall not have any gods besides me, because both of them are recited in the first person. From the third person on, it's from the third utterance on of the Decalogue of the Ten Commandments, it's Moses talking because it's in the third person. Do not take God's name in vain. And because the people were afraid, according to the story which is told in Devarim, in last week's Parsha, and they ran away and asked Moses to be a mediator between God and them. Moses would speak and God would answer him in a voice. So he was acting as the mediator. So last week's Parsha was the Decalogue. This week's Parsha in Ekev is the story of the golden calf, how Moses came down with the first tablets. And he saw the people with the golden calf, and he broke the tablets, and God said, make new tablets, engrave new tablets instead of the ones that you broke. You broke them, you're going to fix them. And Moses does so. And he brings these second tablets to the people on Yom Kippurim, the day of Yom Kippur. So there's something about Parshat Ekev that represents a different level. If we have the level of God speaking directly to the Jewish people, which is called the Decalogue, so in this week's Parsha represents a lower level, which is the level after the break, the level of the second tablets, which Moses brings to the people. Because there's a connection to God even when there's been a bit of a break, and you cannot be on that high level. Even when we compare the two paragraphs of the Shema, we can see the same thing. The first paragraph of Shema is on a very high level. Moses says to the people, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And may my words be engraved on your heart. The words that I command you today, may they be may they be placed upon your heart, meaning take them to heart. So And as I said last week, the commentaries have a difficulty with this. This is what Moses is saying to the people. Live on the level of love. Can every individual be on that level? And I won't repeat what I said last week, but they have a difficulty with this, especially since love is an emotion. How exactly do you command it? So they say, yes, well, you can love God through keeping the mitzvot, but that's what it says in this week's parsha. As you'll notice then, the parsha of Shema in chapter 6 of last week is all in the individual. Moses says, and you shall love the Lord your God. And in Hebrew, ve'ahavta. Ve'ahavta is in the individual in Hebrew. It's you in the individual. Ve'ahavta ata tohav, you. Whereas in the V'hayim Shamoa, it says, V'hayim Shamoa tishme'u al mitzvotai asher anochi metzaveh etchem. If you shall listen to my commandments, which I am commanding you, plural. The second paragraph of the Shema, which is in this week's portion, in Devarim chapter 11, is all in the plural. So now we understand. The first paragraph of Shema, which is a very high level of living on the level of love, this is a level in which individuals can attain, but not always the greater populace. So therefore Moshe says in this week's parsha, and this is an interpretation I heard from the late Rabbi Levi Nachmani, of blessed memory. It's as if Moses is saying, in the name of God, there are those who are going to live on the level of love. That's called ve'ahavta. But then for the general populace, don't worry. Because if you hearken to my words and listen to the mitzvot, to my commands, to love God with all your heart and all your might, which means my commandments will bring you to loving God, then yes, you'll get the rain on time. And you'll have your crops. And there will be things planted there will be grass in your fields for your cattle. And you and your cattle will have what to eat. It's not a problem. In other words, if you can't live on that higher level of a direct connection with God at all times, that's okay. Just follow the commands, live the good life, the life of good deeds and the commandments of God, and that's okay. Some individuals will be able to get there and some won't, but if the populace lives the right way, as good individuals doing the right thing, an ethical life and the life of the commandments that God sets before you, so yes, everything will be fine. So in a sense, what's going on here, if we connect all the dots, is that last week's parsha, Vayetchanan, was the 10 Commandments, direct connection to God of revelation, together with the Shema, which is how to live on that high level to have that direct connection. In this week's parsha, Moses is talking about how he broke the tablets, how he had to bring new engraved tablets, which is called after the fall, after the break, because the general populace can't always be on that level. But there is a level that even the general populace can be on. That's called embracing themselves with the deeds, with the mitzvot. And these commandments will keep them on a level which will suffice, that they'll be going in the way of God, and therefore, yes, they'll get the rain on time, and they will have plenty in the land, and things will be fine. Now, I want to mention something which I discovered just last week. And I found it just actually this last Shabbat, and I found it actually shocking. And I found it even more shocking that I found it difficult to find commentaries that picked up on this until I found one who did. And I'll mention that in a moment. When we read the Book of Devarim, what is the Book of Deuteronomy? It's the last oration of Moses. At the end of the 40 years, he's talking to the people. Eile hadvarim asher diber Moshe el kol Yisrael be'evar Yarden. He's talking to them at the end of the 40 years. Ba'im shana, it says, at the 40th year. This is his last oration. That's why so much of it in the first chapters is talking about prepare yourselves for going to the land. The land will be okay. There might be giants, but don't worry, you'll overcome them, and God will be with you. A lot of mental and actual preparation to entering into the land, which Joshua will take them into the land. But also, what is the Book of Deuteronomy? Because it is part of our Torah. It's not just the oration of Moses. It's part of Torah, which is called the level of the prophecy of Moses. So the Maharami Prague points out already that there is something about the Book of Deuteronomy which relates more to Moses than the other four books, especially the first book where Moses is not even mentioned. But it is part of the Torah. Now, if we sort of can visualize what probably happened here, if this is the oration, Moses is giving this oration to the people, and then, of course, it has to be written down, and when he's writing it down, it's through the prophecy. This is called the prophecy of Moses. In our tradition, he is the highest prophet. As it says at the end of the Torah, there never was a prophet like Moses. And Maimonides adds to that, there never will be, in our tradition, a prophet on that level. So Moses, as he's writing it down, he has this prophetic visions as to what to include and what not. But then we have something very interesting, which I did not find another example of in the whole book of Devarim, right here in the second chapter of Shema. And sometimes when you say something so often, you just don't notice. Somebody once said, if you want to hide something, put it in direct vision where everybody can see it, and that's the best place to hide it. Because it won't occur to anybody that there's anything hidden there. Let me read to you. In chapter 11, just as an example, Moses says in verse 8, Ushmartem et kol mitzvah shanochi mitzavach hayom. Keep all the command which I command you today. Meaning Moses. In order that you shall come to the land which you are going to inherit, and in order that you have lengthened your days on this land which God has promised you. So the commandments, because in the book of Devarim, Moses is commanding lots of things and reiterating many of the commands that were given before. That's why Moses is called in Devarim Mechokek, the lawmaker, because God appointed him as this conduit for all the mitzvot which are commanded, as the medium to give these mitzvot. So now I'm going to read to you the second part of Shema, which is just found a few verses later, from verse 13. If you listen to my mitzvot, which I am commanding you today, this could be Moses, like before. A few times he says these commandments which I'm commanding you. To love the Lord your God, it's in third person, so it's obviously Moses, with all your heart and all your soul. It's Moses. And now listen to verse 14. V'natati metar artzechem bi'ito yoreh umalkosh. If you didn't understand the Hebrew, and I shall give the rain over your land in its proper times, the yoreh, the first rain, and the malkosh, the last rain, and you shall gather your crops of grain and wine and oil. Moses gives rain. I shall give the rain over your land in time. Moses gives rain. It should be, and God will give the rain over your land in time. Like he says in many places. Let's keep going. Next verse. And I shall give that there shall be grass in the fields for your cattle, and you shall eat, and you shall be satiated. Moses gives grass in the fields. Unusual. Next verse, 16, goes back to third. Hishameluchem, be very careful that your hearts not go astray to worship foreign gods or to bow to them, because God will get angry at you. Third person again. What happened? Moses starts off with the third person. All of a sudden, there are two verses in first person. Whereas if God is talking, but isn't it part of Moses' oration? Usually when Moses brings something in the book of Devarim in the name of God, he'll say, and God said to me such and such, and then he'll go on and say the verses. There are no quotation marks. But here, that's not what's happening. Moshe's talking, and right in the middle, there are two verses in first person. which means that God is speaking. What's going on? So I found, number one, I found this shocking. Number two, I found it shocking that the commentaries didn't pick up on it for some reason until I found one commentary. Rabbi Menachem Recanati, the famous Italian Kabbalist from the 14th century. For those who are not familiar, his Pirush on the Torah, or Yakar, or Yakarot, was very popular when it came out in Italy at the time. And about Menachem Recanati, Rabbi Chaim Vital, the main disciple of Isaac Luria and Tzfat of the 16th century, says that he possessed Ruach HaKodesh. He was a man of divine spirit. In other words, a man of real integrity when it came to understanding the Torah. So Menachem Recanati spells us out directly. He says, what's going on? Moses doesn't give rain. What's going on? He asks the same question. He gives three interpretations, where the first is exactly the way I understood it. That's why I want to say it. He says, we say in the Psalms, King David says about Moses, Ish Elohim, the man of God, Psalm 90, and Psalm 89, I think. But, and the Talmud says about Moshe, Shechina medaber mitoch krono, that the divine presence could talk through his mouth. He was a mouthpiece to the divine presence. Sort of like what it says about Bilam. Like Bilam says, whatever God says, that's what I say. I can't make it my own stuff. So Moses starts this is so, now I'm going to explain to you the way I understand this concept. Moses is giving this oration to the Jewish people. When he starts saying to them that if you as a collective follow the mitzvot, and that is your way of loving God with all your heart and all your might, don't worry, that's okay too, because you're going to receive the rain. And he was about to say you're going to receive the rain, and all of a sudden God, as if interjects or interferes, and God through the mouth of Moses says, and I will give the rain in your land in its proper time, so don't worry. So these two verses are the divine presence talking directly to the Jewish people at that moment as Moses is talking. And then after the two verses over, Moses continues. Did this happen as Moses was writing it? Or did this happen when he was actually talking to the people? If it actually happened when he was talking to the people, that's quite amazing. Because for the people, this would be an example of divine prophecy. Well, they all knew that Moses was a prophet, but they will have actually heard the prophecy. But the way I pick up on this also is almost like God is saying to the people, don't worry. Even if you're on this level where you can only hearken to my commandments, but you're not on the higher level of this direct connection of love, don't worry. I promise you I'll give you the rain on time, and you'll have what to eat, and your cattle will have what to eat. Everything will be fine. Don't think that I'm only willing to listen to those who are on the very high level. There's a minimal level, which is also okay, and I understand that because you're human beings. So it's as if God interjects right in the middle. I promise you, you're going to get it. I find this astounding, this verse. And it pulls really everything together. How the two Parshiot, Moses is hinting us these two levels. The level of the Decalogue, where God spoke directly to the Jewish people, and now Moses is just reiterating it in the 40th year at the end of their journey through the desert. And that's also when he mentions the Shema, that as individuals, you can be on the level of love in this direct level of a connection to God, just like me, Moses. But in Parshat Ekev, where he talks about first the sin of the golden calf, how he broke the tablets, how God told him to make new tablets, which are now made by a man and not by God. And that there is a level after the break, after the sin, where God is still with you. If you follow the commandments and live a proper life, God says, I will give the rain in its time. I will take care of you. I can't expect from everybody to live that high level, but I do expect from everybody, God says, to live that minimal level. So these are the two Parshiot. Va'etchanan, Ekev. And the astounding, what I find astounding, prophetic interjection within Moses' talk right in the middle of Vayayim Shemoah, where God is making that promise that we might not be on the highest level, but if we make our effort to follow the commandments, to do the good deeds, to live the good life, God will give us that rain and be with us to make sure that we're able to fill our lives the way we want to. Shalom, shalom.